Today on the LIVEcast, we are debunking Christmas humbug. Hello, my name is Glen Scrivener, and joined as ever, I am here in person with Paul Feasy. Here he is.
Hello.
And we've still got our Christmas on. So I've got my my Darth Vader. So I find your lack of cheer disturbing.
Yep, I've gone for the Die Hard one today. So
yes.
Now I have a machine gun.
And Ash, we've got Ash Cunningham joining us on the line from Cheltenham. What have you brought that's Christmassy? Nothing in your hand you bring?
A TK Maxx zipper jumper.
Okay.
That's what Jesus was brought at the first Christmas, I think.
Is that right?
A gift.
Absolutely.
Very festive. Brilliant. And we're talking to Ash about debunking Christmas humbug. Why are we talking to you about debunking Christmas humbug?
Yes, certainly not because of any massive expertise I have in mythology, which is what I tweeted about last week, and more than just a couple of my mates liked it, which is what I was expecting. And so slightly alarmingly, I then had Glenn appear in my inbox saying, can we chat to you about this?
Yeah. Describe the tweets, or describe the meme that you were responding to.
So it's a meme I think probably a lot of people will have seen. It's basically got a slightly caricaturish cartoon of Jesus on one column and Horus, an Egyptian god, on the other, and basically in columns describes how they were born of a virgin, born on December 25th, born on December 25th, you know, both had left hands, etc., etc. And shows similarities that were stolen.
Right. So for those who don't know, and I don't really know, Horus, who he?
Horus is an Egyptian god, the son of Osiris and Isis.
So he's the son of God.
Boom.
Yes.
There we go.
Yeah.
Case closed.
Yeah, it's not looking good, is it?
He'll turn it around. Wait for it. This will be amazing. Okay, so he's the son of Osiris. Okay, like tell me what you know about. I know nothing. Okay, treat. I mean, Paul. He's an Egyptologist in his spare time. He's basically Indiana Jones, but treat me like a moron. Tell me what you know about like Egyptian mythology.
So I haven't studied mythology, but I was brought up on it. So I was brought up reading myths and legends. And so I did most of the research after having seen the meme. But what struck me was this meme was quoted to me when I was doing a Q&A a few years ago. And the one that they picked from the meme was that they were both born of a virgin. And this is going to get a little not safe for work here. I remembered quite clearly, as a schoolboy would, the story of how Horus was conceived, which was that Osiris, his dad, had been dismembered, all of his body parts torn away by Set, his evil half-brother, and scattered across the globe. And so his sister then kind of runs around the world piecing him back together and gets it all back together. So he's kind of Frankenstein's monster kind of bloke, but she couldn't find the necessary appendage to procreate. So she made one out of gold. And then they slept together, and she bore Horus. And so I don't want to overstate the case. I really want to acknowledge that that's not normally how children are born. Right. So fair play to them there. It's not normal.
It's not normal. It's not normal. Okay.
A gold member, is it?
A gold member.
So sorry, I just brought the tone down. Like,
the man wearing the Die Hard Christmas jumper comes up with that. Of course. Yeah. So that is not the normal method of procreation. No.
Yeah, so having seen that, I thought, well, that's quite funny. Let's have a look at some of the others. We'll get on probably later, I hope, to why I wasn't particularly bothered by the suggestion that Christianity had similarities with Horus. I was bothered by the flagrant lie, and by the fact that it was being put out there deliberately, it seemed, to discourage Christians. And so that was my objection, not,
Yes.
oh, no, we can't have Christianity looking like anything else in the world.
Right. Because whatever else the procreation of Horus was, it was not a virgin birth. This was, yes. Okay. Okay. And where do you think these memes come from? Because it's my impression that they're not coming from Egyptologists. It's not coming from people who have a love for the ancient myths and then notice the similarities with the Jesus story. Everything the people who tweet these memes knows about Egyptology is contained within that meme. I would hazard to suggest.
Sure, if it originated with Egyptologists, it's been whispered through quite a lot of ears on its way to the meme.
Yes.
And I think it's because people just enjoy a debunking.
Yeah.
And the evidence of that is the fact that you've asked me to come on here. Because I wasn't doing anything wildly dissimilar, except I did some research. And certainly a lot of the people who retweeted what I'd put down presumably hadn't then, and fair play to them, hadn't then gone and researched it themselves, but kind of took it on trust. So it's who's making it. I think that's the interesting question. Why are they making them in the first place? Do they think that what they're saying is true, or do they have an agenda? Or is it a bit like what we see in kind of other areas of controversy, Brexit, American elections, where two sides have already decided their position and will cling to anything that kind of proves the other wrong or shames the other or humiliates the other. And truth is already established. Truth is my position. So I don't need to worry about seeing if anything else is true.
Yes. We've done enough waggling on the tea. We need to get into this this tweet. And shall I share my screen? And I'd like to hear it in your voice, Ash.
Oh. A dramatic retelling.
Yes. And whereabouts is it? Here we go.
Can't be far off.
If I'd have known this was going to happen, I'd have worked harder on the syntax and
Here we go. Let's share screen, and then you can maybe read it. Is it going to be this one?
Are you wanting me to read the whole thing? Because that's going to essentially be me filibustering your show.
I think it might be interesting to listen then to reasons why you engage in the tone that you do. I very much enjoyed the tone that it was shared in, and I think it met snark with snark, or it met kind of, it fought fire with fire in a quite interesting way. And I think that will come across if I force you to read it now. So
yeah, sure.
So how's it go?
Yeah, okay. I'm just making sure there's nothing scandalous on your tabs.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Dominic Cummings is up top.
You're going to have to do the scrolling for me.
I will.
What I've written is this: every year I wait until I see this meme pop up and then I post my response. I love mythology and have done since I was a wee boy. Whoever made this has no love of mythology, only of lies. What I've written here is largely a repeat of things I've written before and tidied and reformatted for Twitter.
Right. And then there's the meme with all the various supposed similarities, and then you talk us through them. Yeah,
sure. So Jesus, story written down 2,000 years ago, Horus, story written down 5,000 years ago, and there's not much to dispute there. I think it's generous of them to say 2,000 when the actual account's close to 1,950, though Isaiah's accounts are add nearly a millennium to that. Regardless, Egyptian mythology is older than both the Gospels and Isaiah. So far, so worrying.
Emoji. Can you show us that emoji, Ash? I'd like to see. No, don't.
I naturally have that colour cheeks anyway, so that's just... Second point, Jesus, born of the Virgin Mary. Horus, born of the Virgin Isis. And we've already gone through this, but I will happily concede that Horus' birth was not exactly ordinary. Isis's brother, Osiris, was murdered by their other brother, sometimes called their half-brother or step-brother, Set. Set cut Osiris up and scattered the pieces across the world. Isis gathered up all of the pieces and reanimated him. The one piece she couldn't find was his penis, so she made a substitute out of gold.
Did they ever say why?
It's the classic story, really, isn't it? No.
This gives me that tingly Christmassy feel as well.
Yeah.
It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas.
Where's my penis? Where's my penis?
That's the Facebook clip.
You're in trouble when you think, oh, hang on, Luke wrote that, didn't he? Yeah, so then slept with her brother and bore Horus. Now, what I've said here is I don't think there's a prescribed term for that particular series of events. And if there is a word for it, it's eluded me. But a virgin birthday.
It didn't elude Paul, though.
No, it didn't.
Oh, remember.
It didn't. So, yeah, no one's reading that story and calling the Nativity a ripoff, are they?
No, indeed.
Now, this third point, I should say, I've been challenged on. Jesus born December 25th, Horus born December 25th. This is correct. And then I said, wait, no, sorry, not only are both incorrect, but it's a nonsense assertion. Let me interrupt myself here and say, some people have written to me saying, oh, this is why Tertullian calculated it at December 25th. And it relies on a certain amount of interpretation. And it can't be accurate to the day, for sure. But sure, it's entirely possible. But this is the reason it's a nonsense assertion that they share the date, is that as cute as it is to think that the ancient Egyptians would have had Roman calendars, they obviously didn't. They had Egyptian calendars. And the best adaptation...
Egyptian calendars, those days are numbered. Anyway, terrible pun, sorry.
So this thing back to every conversation I've ever had with Glenn. So the best adaptation from the Egyptian calendar's celebration of Horus' birth is somewhere in the 20s of August. Okay. As far as I can make out.
Yeah.
And so this is the bit that's been challenged to me. Jesus' birth is celebrated on December 25th, most likely thanks to Constantine, who kind of established Tertullian's calculation. From the dates we have, smart people tell me it's probably March. So I didn't look that up myself. I just thought, oh, I was born in March. Zeitgeist. Conspiracy again. And then I put up a picture from the Ashmoleans gift shop of an Egyptian.
Of course. Showing us how it's done.
Okay, fourth. Jesus, the North Star led wise men to him when he was born. That's the men who came from the east, followed the North Star. Horus, the Eastern Star, led 3 wise men to him when he was born. It's a bit of an odd one. It's more likely that it was a different astrological event that led the wise men to Jesus, because the North Star had been around for a while.
Yeah, day 4, I believe.
It just seems unlikely that some astrologers were like, wait, what about that one? Possible. Horus is another story. Now, at times during this meme, I had to make a kind of educated guess as to where they got it from. Yes. Because either it's made up or it's super tenuous. So trying to be as generous as I could, while also being sarcastic.
That's the main thing.
Yeah, it's the line we were
I found this story. I found a story which accounted for the names of the 3 stars in Orion's belt, is what we call it, were Mintaka, Anilam, and Almatak. That's the Egyptians' name for them. And they were referred to as wise or the wise ones.
Okay.
But they were never referred to as men. They pointed to the star Sirius, which for them represented the harbinger of Osiris, who was Horus's father. So they weren't ever regarded as men in any story I could find. And I've asked people to point out if I'm wrong about that. They didn't follow, they pointed, and it's about Osiris, but close enough.
Okay.
5, it's a crossover episode.
Replete with a GIF.
The GIF is when Jess from New Girl appeared for a Brooklyn Nine-Nine episode.
Wow.
And that is because, well, it says Jesus was taken to Egypt to escape the wrath of Herod. Horus was taken to Egypt to escape the wrath of Typhon, who's from Greek mythology. So over 4 millennia after the Horus story kind of first pops up, we start to see some syncretism in the mythologies, which we'll probably talk about later, that mythologies do interweave quite a lot. Right. Typhon was associated with Osiris and Isis's enemy / brother, Set. I haven't been able to see any evidence of an authentic myth involving Horus escaping from Typhon. But if there were, what I've said is, do you know what would be weird? Be weird if that story involved Horus escaping to Egypt, because he's already there. That's where he lives.
But that's not how you put it. You put, the place he's already at. And
Sorry.
This is why this tweet has blown up.
The place he's already at. Is what.
So tell me about your choice of tone and style in engaging with this.
Sure. So what I wasn't replying to an individual.
No.
Which I think is key.
Yeah.
I certainly wouldn't have been so kind of front foot forward if I was replying to someone that I didn't know. What I was doing was putting a meme up that I knew a lot of other people had seen.
Yeah.
And I found it funny. And if something's ridiculous, the best way of showing it's ridiculous is to treat it as being ridiculous.
Right.
So essentially, it's a way of calling a spade a spade.
Yes.
So we treat serious things seriously.
Yes.
And we treat silly things as if they're silly.
Yes.
So I do take the humor in this very seriously, and so it was deliberately sarcastic.
Yeah. You ridicule the ridiculous.
There are people who have read this and thought, oh, this really threatens my idea of the truth of the Gospels.
Right.
And I know that from when myself and one of my old colleagues used to do these Q&A sessions where theologians from around the country, the theology undergrads that is, could just ask us any questions that they liked, and this would come up.
Yeah. And
so I thought, well, let's, the Harry Potter fans would say it's like pointing at the boggart and saying ridiculous. If it's threatening you, then let's just show it up for the nonsense that it is.
Right.
So that's why I took that tone.
Right. Yeah. And I heartily agree. I mean, there is much scriptural warrant, isn't there, for sarcasm, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
There better be.
Yeah. Yeah, if you want to mine through my old tweets, I did a top 10 sarcastic moments in the Bible a while back.
Oh. This would be another episode.
Again, and I again went to great pains to clarify that I'm not endorsing being cruel or unkind to people. But there are moments of sarcasm all throughout the scriptures.
Yeah.
Just to show nonsense up for being nonsense.
Yeah. I heartily agree. I mean, you can't see Elijah's response to the prophets of Baal in any other way. I mean, like how very cruel and rude.
Doesn't he say, like, perhaps your God is on the toilet?
Yeah.
Does he say that?
Yeah. That's and then I mean the Lord in Job is just amazing, because like everyone else has such sympathy for Job at the end of like all the sufferings of Job, and then the Lord's like, so where were you when I stretched out the stars? Tell me, you're very old. You must know.
Yeah,
Come on, Job. Like, wow. Like,
and I think we see it in Jesus as well. So both of those were on my list. I see it even Jesus when he's been quite genial, and you can fight with me on this one, but there's a bit in John's Gospel when Nathaniel is doubting who he is, and Jesus says, "Oh, I saw you earlier when you're under the tree," and Nathaniel's like, "Oh, you're the Son of God," and Jesus goes, "You're going to see more amazing things than me knowing you were under a tree." And I think John, I suspect John was enjoying that as a kind of launch into, then we're going to see the wedding at Cana and all of these other miracles coming along.
Yes.
After.
Yeah. So, so you've talked about Horus, and another popular one is Mithras, comes up. What are the parallels that people try to make with Mithras? They
claim virgin birth again, I think, there. And this time, technically, it's true. In most of the accounts of Mithras, Mithras is born from a rock. I suppose rocks are technically virgins.
I think that's sarcasm.
I definitely detected sarcasm.
But again,
should we have a look at an example? Because because famously on QI, I think back in 2006, maybe like 14 years ago, Stephen Fry and the QI elves had a go at Christmas is a ripoff of Mithras, and it's fascinating. Let's have a look at it.
So let's just take a few moments then together and try to remember, why is Christmas Day on December the 25th?
Ring, ring, ring a ding.
It's the birth of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Wallamy woo.
Well, I thought we'd get it out of the way.
Yes.
Is that a very, very small fire, or are those huge stockings?
It's a midwinter solstice. It's a pagan festival that's been appropriated by Christianity.
There is a great deal of truth in that.
Do I get the points back?
You will certainly get some back. It was indeed, there's a Teutonic, Celtic and pagan view that if you survived the winter solstice on the 21st of December, you have a feast to celebrate. But also, there was the Roman god.
Was it Saturnalia?
There was the Saturnalia was also at that time of year, but there was Mithras.
What does it tell us, Ash, that Stephen Fry and the QI elves concoct that on their Christmas special?
Yeah, firstly, it's brilliant, isn't it, that it was the elves that told him that story. Challenged him on that. So, where are you getting this information from, Stephen? Oh, the elves told. It's not the first time that QI will have been kind of shown up on that regard of trying to debunk a popularly held thing. And it turns out it's popularly held because it was true. But they've mined the internet and found some suggestions. I did make a note of some of the claims. He was sent to Earth to live as a mortal. Through him, it's possible for sinners to be reborn. He died for sins, came back to life on Sunday, born of a virgin. There's so much going on. He had 12 disciples, was one of the things Stephen Fry said. And again, I'm afraid I didn't go to as many pains as I did for Horus to look at this, but the only reference I could see to 12 disciples was there's what do you call it? It's not a sculpture, but it's a stone carving of Mithras. With 12 faces around him, I think, as he's slaying the bull, which is the Mithras story.
Mm-hmm. What is the Mithras story?
The big Mithras story is of his slaying of the bull, which represents a huge variety of different things according to the story appears in at least 3 different cultures. So you've got the old kind of Iranian Mithras cult, and then later on more well-known within the Roman cult. But that would be the kind of salvation aspect. That's how Mithras is the savior. But again, it's just a standard hero narrative of the hero killing the monster. But the 12 figures that are watching, if you look at the carving, are just quite clearly the signs of the zodiac, not 12 adoring followers or Peter and James and John.
So it's such a stretch, and again, why do they want to make such a stretch to find these points of similarity?
And again, I'd probably say that Stephen Fry and the QILs probably believe it, but whoever's kind of made this up is the person with the agenda. And again, it comes back to that idea of truth has moved in our minds, I think, as a culture, that truth is just what my position is, and then I back it up by any means possible. And I mean, when I was looking up the Mithras thing, I saw people operating under kind of Christian concerns, saying, oh, let me debunk this, and saying things that just weren't true. So one thing I saw was, so one of Stephen Fry's claims was that they drank the blood and ate the body, I think, of Mithras, his followers did. And one of the Christian reverse debunkings said, no, there's no sign of this. So the very earliest we could date anything like this would be the Middle Ages. But Justin Martyr himself writes about the Mithras cultists copying them and doing this. Right. But of course, then what you realized is that having traced it back, you realize that the chronology's switched. It's Justin Martyr's writing kind of 150s AD. So that's after Jesus and after the Last Supper.
Yeah. Because there's a difference between the Persian kind of Mithraic cult and what comes to be sort of worshipped in Roman times. Is that right? Yeah. And where do you think that Christian impulse comes from? Because obviously the person who wanted to say the eating the body and the drinking the blood only came in the Middle Ages. They clearly felt threatened enough by the similarities to want to distance themselves from these myths. And I guess that's one of the tactics that you can take. One of the tactics is, no, Mithras, Horus, they're nothing like the Jesus story. And none of these other legends out there in the world have anything to do with the Christians. So Christianity is like totally and utterly unique. I guess that's one tactic, but it's not the only tactic, is it?
No, it's not. And so to justify that kind of reaction is 1 Corinthians 15. It's made absolutely clear that if the story of the gospel, and particularly the resurrection, is not true, then Christianity's kaput. So that's why, quite understandably, atheists who want to attack Christianity will attack the story of Jesus, and that's why Christians, when they see that under attack, will defend against that and want to say, no, it is true. I guess one of the things that apologists have to learn is not to buy into the presuppositions of what other people are saying. And the presupposition there is, if there are similarities, then Christianity must be false. Or if it is a myth, then it must be false. And so it might be helpful for us just to kind of settle our terms slightly. So mythology, I mean, people do define myths differently. As I understand myths, they don't have to be untrue. I jotted down a Northrop Frye quote. He describes myths as being stories that tell a society what is important for it to know, whether about its gods, its laws, or its structures. And so within that, you have true and untrue. So you have, I guess at this time of year, a kind of Santa myth that's going on. A month ago, we had the Guy Fawkes myth. The Guy Fawkes myth tells us, part of what's important about the structure of our society. It's not untrue, but it's a myth nonetheless.
Right.
Perhaps a more faithful way of describing myths is to use the language of myth. And so if I could do that, in Beowulf, you have these things called the Miakstapa, or the Mark Steppers, the border stalkers. And they kind of patrol this line between light and dark, good and evil, truth and lies. And they can cross into either side. They're not tame. They don't belong fully to either side. So you can't trust them. But their role in the storytelling, their role in the storytelling society, rather, is to keep people on their side of that line. So Picasso says, I paint lies to tell the truth. And so that the role of a myth is to be a story that keeps people on the right side ethically in terms of truth. And yeah, so that's how I like to think of myths, as being the Miakstapa.
Yeah. And you get that with like Nathan. How does Nathan confront David with his sin? He tells him a story. It's a made up story. And fascinatingly, David thought he was living in reality, whereas actually he had constructed this fantasy world in which, because he's king, he can do whatever he wants with Bathsheba. He's actually living in fantasy. And so how is he awoken to the fantasy that he's been living out? Well, let's make up a story and let's really embellish it. And there's the little ewe lamb and it goes to sleep in his arms. And it was like a daughter to him. And he's really tugging at the heartstrings. And then you are the man. But it's just fascinating, isn't it? It's the myth of that little lamb that wakes David up to actual truth.
Yeah.
So there's a real place for myths then, right? Real place for storytelling and legend.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need them. Like you say, we can react to right and wrong in a way that we don't necessarily when we're faced with the decisions ourselves, as David shows.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant way of raising children. Is
right.
You read the Bible with them. If you want to raise them in a Christian household, but read them stories as well. Let their imaginations, thrive, and let them imagine themselves into stories and understand the difference between right and wrong and good and evil. I had a question that bugged me as a child. I used to ask my dad all the time when we saw a film, do bad guys support bad guys when they're watching a film? Because it's not a particularly profound question, but for a child, you're thinking, how could anyone not know that this is evil?
Right.
While I'm engaging in the story.
Right.
And yet you look at the papers,
yeah,
and people do these things. So how does that compute? Does a murderer kind of support the murderers in a movie and then go out and kill, or do they support the good guys and then go out and kill?
Right.
It shows that evil is dissonant.
Yes.
And
to immerse someone in a story is to, whether they are a murderer or not, to immerse them in a world in which, of course, the murderer, justice must find its man and the murderer must go down for that murder. Whereas, in real life, he lives in the fantasy in which he's a good person. Actually, it takes a myth to wake him up to reality. Yeah. I mean, one person who obviously told a lot of myths was C.S. Lewis, and you've named your firstborn after a character in one of his books. I take it it's from the Horse and His Boy. You've named your firstborn Shasta. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
So I mean, he famously, like, in 1931, had a conversation with Tolkien, in which he said the myths are lies breathed through silver, and Tolkien said, no, those ancient myths, they are not lies. What did Tolkien mean? That because what Lewis was referring to was the dying and rising gods, the Horuses of this world.
Yes. The boulders and the Osirises, yeah.
Yeah. So Tolkien said they are not lies, these ancient myths. What does he mean?
Essentially, he means what he says. He's saying that these things are true. I believe in the dying and rising God. What Tolkien understands as a creator with a small c is that when you make something, you're putting yourself into it. And so for Tolkien, he says, well, if anything's true about God, we shouldn't be surprised to find it in reality. I put up a quote from his very long poem Mythopoeia, which he wrote ostensibly for Lewis, in answer directly to that question, where essentially you can see written through it beliefs about nature that probably everyone believes, bits of Lord of the Rings mythology, and truths from the Bible, all kind of woven in together and all telling the same truth. And so what Lewis eventually went on to realize was that the Bible, the gospel story, was myth, which is potentially a dangerous thing to say. It's not untrue, but it is still myth. In the same way that it's also, John's gospel is biography as well as being gospel. Its primary function is gospel. It's good news. It's light into the world. But it's also a myth that tells us a story that was written into creation, that was written into the hearts of men as they suffered under the curse that was put upon mankind in Genesis 3, and have been longing for this story to be realized since. Of course, there are stories about that.
Yes.
It would be bizarre for there not to be. Becoming a Christian isn't kind of someone just surprising you with something that you've never heard before, just come into a whole new reality. Becoming a Christian is more like kind of waking from a dream and realizing that you weren't dreaming after all. It's go, oh, right. And the kind of curtains are pulled back and you understand, oh, so that's why the world is shaped in this way. That's why I'm who am so evil, want there to be justice. How does that work? Why would someone who does wrong want there to be a cosmic judge? Well, because written into the hearts of men and written all throughout creation is this need for justice and mercy to come together.
So with those lenses on, how do you think, okay, if Lewis or Tolkien saw that meme with Horus, I mean, both of them, let's say they just take for granted the silliness of the inventions that are there. What would be something a Lewis or a Tolkien would say if someone said to them, oh, it's just like Horus? What would they say?
Yeah, I flatter myself that I wouldn't have been too far off their tone. I do think there would have been I wouldn't have done it nearly so well as they would, but I think there would have still been that element of sarcasm, because the writer of the meme hasn't understood the relationship between myth and truth, and nor have the recipients. If I could, I've got a copy of Miracles by C.S. Lewis here. This is essentially what Lewis does say in response to memes like this. So he writes, the Corn King, which is another myth, is derived through human imagination from the facts of nature, and the facts of nature derived from her creator. The death and rebirth pattern is in her because it was first in him. On the other hand, elements of nature religion are strikingly absent from the teachings of Jesus and from the Judaic preparation which led up to it, precisely because in them, nature's original is manifesting itself. So that's Lewis saying, answering the question, well, how can there be these similarities to myths and yet no acknowledgement of them within the Christian myth. It's because, well, actually, this is the original. This is the story that was told in the first place, from which those other stories were derived. Athanasius On the Incarnation talks about humanity's fallen nature being like a portrait. We were made in the image of God that's kind of suffered the ruins of time, and something needs to be done. And so Jesus comes to resit for the portrait, which is a beautiful image.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what's going on with the Jesus myth, is that these stories of creation, of redemption, of fall, are written all throughout creation, and we'll find them all over the globe.
Right. Is it true that...
And then the real story is told.
Yes.
And it's told in history.
Yes.
And it's observable, and it's there, and it's true. Yeah.
And Tolkien's got that stuff. Just as the word became flesh at Christmas, so the myth became history. It got anchored into our world. Is it true that I've heard that Lewis would have a practice on Christmas Eve of reading Virgil's Fourth Eclogue, which is this poem written in sort of 50 BC, where Virgil's kind of saying, "Begin to rule, O golden child, and under your scepter all the nations will come," and that kind of thing. He certainly actually seemed to draw courage, or his vision of the universal light, who is Christ, was broadened by looking at something like Virgil and a poet writing in 50 BC about the golden child is going to be born. That probably, I don't know how that strikes modern evangelical Christians, but he did it, it seems.
Yeah, it probably will make some of us feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. I think it makes us feel uncomfortable when we haven't, again, fully grasped the relationship between truth and myth. I think it's okay not to have grasped that, and it's okay to think, well, actually, we don't want truth to be threatened. But when you think about it, I mean, you could explain it away in a kind of Horus meme way and say, well, this is a long time after Isaiah 9 was written that Virgil's writing this, and certainly a long time after the promise buried in the curse in Genesis 3.
Right.
But I don't think you even need to do that for it to be a really lovely practice to read something like that and say, if Caiaphas can be right when he says one man has to die for all the people, why can't Virgil?
Right.
Why can't we look at these stories and say, what's beautiful about that is that has truth in it.
Right.
Because again, beauty and truth can only be divorced so much.
Right.
Yeah. And so for me, when I'm teaching, I'm constantly going to myths just in my mind for illustrations, and they'll either show kind of a dearth of the Christian tradition, or they'll show a kind of
echo or
example of it. An echo. So not a couple of weeks ago, when I was teaching on justice, I talked about the story of Astrea, who was the goddess of justice, who at the Iron Age hated blood. And so at the Iron Age, she was like, oh, you're getting too good at killing one another, I'm running away, and went away into a constellation of stars, just retreated from the earth. And you just think, well, okay, there's something interesting there. There's something about a god of justice and their presence, and something about the stars. But actually, what good is a god of justice who's afraid of blood? Like, what if she'd have stuck around for nuclear warheads and Twitter? Like, she'd have run even further. But there's something in the Christmas story that says, well, actually, no, the god of justice came not only to see blood but to be killed. His he too was observed in the stars, but the stars represented his coming, not his going. And again, my favorite thing that I stumbled upon in the Horus research was they have that list of names for Jesus and Horus that were apparently all the same, and I couldn't find most of them for Horus, but there's a great note I found that Horus is called the distant one, whereas Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. And so myths can show us lack as well as presence, but really show us the reason that the goddess of justice retreated in the Roman stories was to explain. It was essentially theodicy. It was to explain, well, why is there not justice here? It's looking at truths and saying, well, actually, no, we are in need of these things. And so it's pointing to the gospel all the time, these stories, because they're examining the desires and needs of humanity.
Yeah, very good.
So if this kind of thing came up in a conversation with someone, maybe you knew, or maybe you've met them at an event or something, what kind of angle would you take in actually discussing this kind of one-on-one with someone?
Yeah, so this is going to sound odd. I definitely wouldn't take the tone that I took that I've modelled for you.
Sarcasm all the
way. There was a moment a few years ago at the White House. Oh, what's it called? The
White House Inn? No.
Okay. The
in
White
America.
House press. Okay. I've lost the words.
Conference? I don't know.
Press
basically where all the comedians get to rip.
The roast.
Yeah, essentially it's a roast.
Right, okay.
Not called that. I can't remember what it's called. Anyway, so Hassan Minhaj, he was the kind of headliner when Donald Trump was first there for it, although I think he was notably absent. And he said something along the lines of, I don't get why people are still following Trump. Every day we're telling jokes about how ridiculous it is to follow Trump. And I'm watching this thinking, oh, you're mocking them every day and they're still not on your side. There's obviously something that's off about doing evangelism in a mocking way, because victory in your mind then is not winning the person, it's winning the argument, and it can never be that. The famous apologist Ellis Potter tells the story of how he became a Christian when Francis Schaeffer told him, I don't know, as the answer to a question. And he goes, oh, that means he must have been really sure about the stuff that he has been telling me. So honesty just has to be right at the top of all of our conversations. Even if you feel stumped by something, then, yeah, that stumps me. So you don't have to be an Egyptologist in order, to faithfully defend Christianity at this time. But what you want to do is you want to ask someone, well, why would it be a problem if these stories are similar? Why would that be such a stumbling block? And you can then start to kind of piece together what their actual objection is. Is it just that they think that this is a type of colonialism where big bad Christianity just kind of went around stomping on Roman culture? And again, if you look at history, it's probably a little bit more the other way around was how things went. And Christianity was, in a sense, the opposite of that. It made a level playing field for all people. It wasn't overbearing on anything. It was saying, look, here is the truth of the universe, and kind of gathers these stories in, not in a syncretistic way, but in a, no, you were right. You were right about that. Act 17, Paul on Mars Hill saying, well, no, look, there's something true about what you thought. Let me fill the rest in for you. And that's what needs to be going on in our evangelism, not let me beat up this stupid meme that you've posted. But okay, let's ask the question that you're really asking, which is, was Jesus real? Was he really who he said he was? Did he really do what you claim he did? And there are very solid and very comforting and life-giving answers to those questions.
And how do these things then help you with your own appreciation for Christmas itself?
Yeah, I think like I was just saying, they help me understand what Christmas actually is, which isn't just the origin story of Jesus whom I worship, but actually this is the moment that all the stories came true. Christmas is the moment that Sam Gamgee's kind of looking to in Lord of the Rings when he's talking about the heroes and the point of no return and all of that. Christmas is the moment when God said, well, actually, I'm here. I've come and I'm going to experience life as you've experienced it. I'm going to experience suffering as you've experienced it, and far worse. And I'm going to experience judgment as you should experience.
Amazing.
And so you cannot divorce all of these stories from each other. Christmas has to be about Easter, and Easter about Christmas at the same time. And so when you see these memes come up, I see it as an insult to myth, not an insult to my faith.
Yes. Amen. Amen. And Christmas, the time when the word became flesh, when the myth became fact, when the author became the hero, and we praise him for it. Ash Cunningham, thank you so much for joining us on the LIVEcast.
Cheers, guys.